So, anthropology, again, specifically if we're looking at one of the four subfields, cultural anthropology, focuses on studying cultural behavior of different groups of people all around the world. Sometimes people don't want to be studied. That makes sense, right? You make them feel like they're the other, they're strange, they're exotic. Sometimes they don't want you bringing your ideas into where they are. They want to be isolated. Now, this picture here is circulated for a really long time. I'm really not sure if it's true or not, but it's kind of funny. And it also sums up when you are an anthropologist and you do research, especially you're researching living human beings, there's some ethics and morals you really have to think about. This says the anthropologist decided that this tribe was to remain uncontacted. So, kind of them saying, we don't want you here. And hopefully that was respected. So that's just something you got to remember going forward. Um, when you're researching humans, again, sometimes they don't want to be researched, and they have that right. Right, the four subfields of anthropology. So all of you are experts in this by now. We've got archaeology. This is up here in the upper left. Um, we've got biological anthropology in literature, especially older literature. You're going to hear it referred to as physical anthropology. We've got linguistics, the study of language, pictured down here on the bottom left. And then again, cultural anthropology, just kind of showing the diversity of humans, human culture, traditions, religions, down here at the bottom right. So that's the four subfields that make up anthropology. Of course, there are, you can break that down even further. We're going to talk about like applied anthropology as we get further in. I think I've mentioned some of the different breakdowns within the four subfields that you could go into if you were interested, and there are tons. There, almost everything you can think of, there's an anthropologist probably involved somehow. That's normally a surprise to students. But when we get further in and you get to working on your projects, which are going to be about a crisis that you've selected, you'll definitely see how anthropology is emerged into our world and all these different sections that we've just never really thought about. All right, we're going to hop on into Module 2 real quick. I try to keep these lectures pretty short. I normally try to hit about 15 minutes. Sometimes it goes a little over into 20, but I try not to keep you too long here. These are optional, but they do sometimes kind of help you um, think about things maybe you didn't think about and come at it at a different perspective. Maybe kind of help with the text, making it make just a little bit more sense to you. So we're going to quickly go through Module 2. We're focusing on evolution. We're also focusing on human adaptations, and then we're going to talk about race. So this just picture here shows what we would define when we think of the word race. We tend to think of biological characteristics, mostly skin color. What does someone's hair look like? Their facial features, and then we lump them into these categories. Right? The government lumps us into these categories. If you've ever had to fill out an application form or anything that asks your race, and you've got to check these boxes, and for some people that's hard, to just check one box. Um, that's why race is complicated, and we're going to get into that a little bit. All right, so race, um, this is with reference to humans. It began to emerge in about the 17th century, so the 1600s. Most people are surprised to find out that race is relatively new. It was something that was constructed, kind of an idea for political and social reasons. Um, so 800 years ago, this concept of race really didn't exist. So race is when we categorize, again, people by their physical differences. These are visible physical traits that you can see. So again, the most common one is skin color. We've also got hair texture, facial features, eye formations, and based on this, we put people in these little groups. So why exactly did race get constructed? So race is a social construct. Um, you're going to read a little bit more in your book about that. It came about for social identification. This group is Caucasian, this group is African American, this group is Native American. We wanted to divide people and put them in their own little spaces. And then you had, us and them, or me and other, and um, that's where we started running into a lot of problems that unfortunately we're still facing now. This caused a lot of stratification. If you want to think about the United States with segregation, we segregated different groups of people based on their race. Then this turned into some races being superior to others, while other races were considered inferior races. So if you want to think about again with segregation, such as school segregation, I live in Arkansas, so we had Little Rock 9, and that was when the 9 African American children were selected to attend Central High School in Little Rock, and the National Guard had to be called in because people wouldn't let them in the school, and of course they were very fearful, and rightfully so, for their life. So the government had to actually step in. So that's just a really small example of race and this social stratification and what it led us to. All right, so you're going to get into a little bit of this in your book. A lot of the disciplines, anthropology, psychology, sociology, a lot of different sciences, especially anything really related to the study of humans, didn't start very pretty. Most of them have a kind of a dark past to them, and unfortunately, anthropology is one of those. So, anthropology in the 19th and the 20th century kind of came up with ways to justify this segregation based on races or physical traits. It's called pseudoscience. Of course, if you know what the word pseudo means, it means fake. So fake science. It was all completely made up in what they were doing. There really wasn't any justification for it. So what they would do is they would take human skulls and they would measure them. And based on the measurements, they would state, you're African, you're Caucasian, um, and the thoughts behind it was if you had a larger brain space, your skull was larger, then you had a bigger brain, you were more intelligent, and then therefore you were Caucasian. So this also happened with Native American skulls to justify what was happening to them in the United States during this time also. It made it into publications, it made it into conferences, made it into universities. It was treated like, again, real science, and it was used to justify what was happening during this time, unfortunately. But we did have a savior. So Franz Boas, if you have not heard of him, he's considered the father of Western anthropology. So he decided that he was kind of interested in this also, and he was also prepared to call BS on it. So during this time, that was kind of him stepping out and putting his neck out there, but he did. And he decided that he was going to research children of immigrants to the United States in the early 1900s. So he found out when he measured skull size. Now they were alive. He measured their skulls while they were alive, where most of the other scientists were doing measurements from people who were deceased. So he found that the skull sizes differed significantly from the parents and the kids. And he found through this that local environment conditions had a significant effect. So if you've got one race, and of course they have offspring, you expect that the skull size is going to be pretty similar. It's not going to be that far off, especially if you're basing it on race and you're trying to say, all Caucasian skulls are going to be within this range to this range in their measurements. African skulls are going to be here to here. Native Americans here to here. But then now you've got offspring of the same race, and the skull size is dramatically different. And he's like, wait a minute, what's going on with this? So he found out that the environmental conditions have significant effects on the size of our skull. So he argued that if craniofacial features um, were malleable in just a single generation, that the pseudoscience of being able to define race and map these ancestral populations all the way through just based on the measurements of different facial features, that that was incorrect, right? That it had no merit to it at all. So he pushed back really strongly on this, thankfully. Of course, it didn't completely stop everything, especially overnight, but Franz Boas did, as the father of anthropology, of course, had some backing to him. So he was able to push back on some of this. So let's back up a little bit when we talk about race is a social construct, right? So it was, in a sense, made up to again put people in these different groups, so you could have the social stratification. So one race could state they were superior to other races, and we know this led to things like slavery, mass murder, taking land from Native Americans, taking cultures away from people, colonizing different areas based on this idea of a superior race. Genocides occurred. Um, a lot of problems have, of course, developed from this. But I want to make sure that when you think, okay, race is a social construct, right? It doesn't completely really exist. Us as humans created it. People are people, right? You can't just kind of divide us into these categories based on how we look. That almost makes it seem like the idea of race is almost like this illusion, and it's not, right? It is um, definitely here something that people have to deal with. It's it's not an illusion at all. So when you think about it, I just kind of want you to put that in your head on how you discuss it. It it is really good to understand how race came about, that it is something social, it's not biological. Again, you can't, we're all the same species. You can't divide us like that. This is just something that humans came up with. But with humans coming up with it, it exists. It is there. It is still there. It is still impacting lives. Some people say things like, and a lot of it is meant really well, right? I don't see color. You do see color. You have to see color. And that's not coming across as color as in one color is superior or inferior to the other one. You have to see color because it's part of our life. And if you don't see color, you're ignoring someone else's struggle. And you just can't do that. That's almost like sweeping hundreds and hundreds of years under the rug, because now you don't see color. And here is one example of this that we recently as a society went through, and that's COVID. So this says, has race become biological? One example of this is healthcare and race, food access and race, diseases and race. So on the right here, we've got the pandemic's racial disparity. So if you look at this chart, excuse me while I get closer to it so I can see it too. It says COVID-19 deaths per 100,000 people in the U.S., and they divided it by race. It says or ethnicity. This was as of July 30th, 2020. And you can see the very top one here on our death rate is Black or African American. This is followed by American Indian or Alaska Native, Hispanic or Latino, and we've got Asian, White, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander, and then this section of other. So why is Black or African American, according to this, having more deaths due to COVID? So with healthcare and race, they put this out in the news. African Americans are dying at a greater rate from COVID. So that makes it seem that African Americans as a race, for some reason, are responding worse to COVID and they're getting higher deaths. If you really start looking into it and kind of pulling it apart, then you'll see, well, what is the access to healthcare? What is the access to doctors in the area? What is the access of not having to go to work? What were they called? It's completely left me. But you were like, I don't want to say an important worker. That's not what I'm after. But general worker, that's not it either. I'm sure it'll come to me as soon as I cut this off. But you were considered. You worked in some form of service, a grocery store. Most schools went virtual, but factories, different jobs like that were essential. That's it. I knew it was coming. Essential worker. You were considered an essential worker, and you had to go to work, right? Some people that were not considered essential, that were in the higher corporate jobs and things, or had the option to go virtual, went virtual, and then they've got this buffer between them and other people where they're not in contact with people that have COVID as much. But these essential workers had to go to work. They didn't have a choice. They could lose their job. They needed the money. They had to eat. And then of course you're going to have a higher rate of people getting COVID in these groups of essential workers because you're forcing them out here with everyone else. You're working 40, 50 hours a week. How are you going to have the time to go to the doctor? How are you going to have, time to get medicine if you don't have good insurance? Again, how are you going to get healthcare that way? So it kind of skews the data when healthcare is saying Black or African Americans are dying at a higher rate. It makes it seem race again. This one group of people, they must be more susceptible, right, to COVID than any of these other groups. That's why. But then they're not getting further into it and saying why. Because biologically, we're all as susceptible, right, as the other person. But what environmental factors, what social factors, what economic factors do we have going on that's making this data higher for one race than the other? So be really careful with what you read. It might make things sound a certain way when it's really not. You've got to kind of dig deeper into that. And if you say I don't see color, then you're not going to dig any deeper. And you've got to. You've got to research things for yourself. Don't just completely take it at face value. All right. So you're going to watch a video. See if I remember what it's called. Skin color is an illusion. It's a great little clip. So go ahead and watch that, and then you're going to have a discussion question on that. And then right before we wrap up here real quick, I know we're already at 21 minutes, I'm sorry. But we're going to talk about evolution just really quick in the adaptation of humans. So you've probably seen this picture before. If you haven't, you've seen a meme of this picture before, which I've got one or two on the next slide. This is called the March of Progress, and it has caused a lot of confusion. I remember hearing, especially if I told people like I was studying anthropology, one thing a lot of people would like to say, kind of have a question about, almost sarcastically, is if we evolved from monkeys, then why are there still monkeys? And as a beginning, undergraduate student in anthropology, I'm like, I have no clue. I don't know. I don't have an answer to you. And then that was almost like feeding fuel to their fire. So I remember when my first biological anthropology class, the instructor showed a picture of this, and I was so grateful when she explained it, because now, I had to come back when people would ask me this. So the reason that through evolution, um, we we didn't evolve from apes and monkeys, if that makes sense. We have a common ancestor to other primates, specifically like apes and chimpanzees and things that we came from. Almost like there's this main tree, and then we forked, and we went one way and we went the other. So we didn't replace, we just kind of offshooted. So let me show you real quick. Okay, this is just two of the memes, this march of progress. So it almost makes this progress seem um, lateral. We're following along in a straight line, and that's not how it happened at all, of course, just super oversimplified. But here is like one of those trees. So it shows kind of different primates here. And if you look at this bottom one, you can see that right in front of us are gorillas, we've got baboons, we've got monkeys, and we're kind of here at the tail end in our own little stem, our own little offshoot. We didn't come out of some of these other primates. We kind of evolved and developed off of our own. And I know sometimes that's really confusing. Um, and people will use the whole we evolved out of monkeys, but then monkeys are still here somehow, and that's not what happened. So just wanted to clarify that real quick. Should also be in your book to kind of help with that. We don't go too deep into biological anthropology. We really only skim the surface of these four subfields. So if you find one that you're really interested in, I would suggest you get with your advisor and you discuss with them your interest in continuing some of these other courses, and then you find one specifically for like biological anthropology or cultural anthropology or linguistics or archaeology. All right, so this is just a collection of different skulls. Again, if we replaced one, came out of one, then of course the other one wouldn't exist. But that's not what happened. We're, again, kind of like an offshoot here, like a cousin almost, and along the path we had a common ancestor. All right, so that is just a really quick overview of Module 2 with a summary of Module 1 thrown in there. I'll do another one when we get to Module 3. That one should only be about 10-15 minutes long. So if you need me, go ahead and send me an email if you get stuck with anything. Other than that, we'll see y'all later. Bye.